All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started with some housekeeping so that we can get the ball rolling here. Welcome to our March ECHO session. There are some new names I see on our list here, so I'll give a little bit of background. This is part of our Mental Health and Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Training Initiative. The goal here is to provide education for people who work with people with disabilities so that we can provide better mental health services, dispel myths, and get rid of stigma surrounding mental health for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. These sessions are recorded. They're kept on our Canvas page so that people can go back and watch them. So by participating in this session, you are agreeing to be recorded. If at any time you would not like to be recorded, feel free to leave. A couple basic Zoom items. We've been in the Zoom world for a while, but if you need a refresher, we are able to help you rename your profile if you need to. If you would like to raise your hand at any point in the session, you can use that feature if you hover over the reactions button. If you do need to change your name and you want someone to walk you through that, you can message one of our ECHO personnel. We have these ECHO backgrounds. You can see myself. James is also part of our ECHO team. Because we talk a lot about mental health services in these presentations and case discussions, we want to make sure that we're protecting individual privacy because we'll be sharing some potentially sensitive information. So if you're sharing information about another person, if you're requesting some advice or participating in our case discussion, avoid using any identifying information such as their first, middle, last name, or initials. And don't provide any other identifying information like contact or family members or friends. If you aren't sure whether or not you can share a specific piece of information for discussion, reach out to an ECHO Hub team member. You can message me or someone else with our ECHO background. This is an ECHO session, which is different from a traditional webinar. It is more involved as far as discussion is concerned. We start with a didactic presentation, and then we will follow that up with a case scenario discussion. So there isn't much discussion during the didactic presentation, but following that, it's a very involved group discussion. And these sessions are a lot more successful if we have more group participation. So we hope that you'll turn on your camera and make sure that you engage during that case discussion scenario specifically. Also, you are able, if you would like, to submit a case scenario for one of our future ECHO sessions. It's a great opportunity if you'd like input from other members of the professional community. If you'd like to do that, you can send an email to our canvas at mhidd.aggies.usu.edu. And I'll drop that email in the chat as well. As I mentioned, we'll start with a didactic presentation, and that will be followed by a case presentation and discussion with some feedback. This is more of a community of practice rather than a standard webinar. So we're really looking forward to hearing your guys' perspectives and your knowledge from your professional background. This is that email that I just mentioned. I will drop in the chat. If you do have a case scenario, we would love for you to share. This is also the email that you can use to join our Canvas page, and I'll touch on that in a minute here. We also offer certificates of attendance as well as CEUs through the Utah Social Work Association. If you'd like either of those or both, you can request them through our survey. If you want them, you do have to fill out the survey, and the link has just been dropped in the chat. So if you would like a certificate of attendance and or a CEU certificate from the Utah Social Work Association, please fill out that survey and we'll make sure we get that to you. And even if you don't want a certificate or a social work CEU, we really appreciate you filling out the survey. It's how we collect ideas for future presentations and find ways to improve our sessions. We do house these recordings as well as resources that are shared on the Canvas page, and anyone is welcome to join if you'd like to have access to previous recordings or resources that have been shared. If you'd like to join, you can send an email to that mhidd@aggies.usu.edu with a Echo MHIDD Canvas registration request, and we'll get that set up for you. We do have social media pages. This isn't our only Echo. We have several that are going on here at the Institute for Disability Research, Policy and Practice. We have another mental health related Echo that you may be interested in. So I'd encourage you to take a look at our social media pages and see if there are other sessions you'd like to sign up for. There are also other resources there. We have 2 more sessions in this series, so we are almost wrapped up. Our next session will be on April 8th, and this is more geared toward disability service providers. They're revamping is probably not the right word, but changing some of the requirements for documenting and reporting critical incidents for disability service providers. So next month, we are planning to have a presentation on that with information on what has changed and the best way to go about reporting those types of incidents. Today, we are super lucky to have Dr. Julia Connelly presenting. She is working on restarting her computer and getting technology to cooperate, but in the meantime, I will give a brief introduction. Dr. Julia Connelly was born in Leipzig, Germany, and received her master's and doctorate degrees from the University of Utah. In January of 2018, she founded the Autism Clinic, a community mental health clinic with emphasis on autistic individuals' strengths and gifts, while providing therapeutic support for clients to reach their full potential in life. In the summer of 2020, she helped create the nonprofit Spectropolis, serving individuals and families affected by autism, providing valuable social connections, activities, and events. At this time, she is providing assessment and consultation services, as well as individual therapy for autistic individuals across the lifespan, addressing common symptoms of anxiety, depression, and PTSD in the context of autism spectrum disorder. You will bear with us for just a moment here. We will get technology time while we are working on getting that running. If you guys have any questions specific to today's topic, which is autism in females and co-occurring mental health concerns, will you drop those in the chat?
So I am having a computer issue and I'm working feverishly. Okay. Rachel, did you get the presentation?
Yes. Would you like me to, we can go ahead and I can just pull
Let
those
me
up if you'd like.
try and share it one more time.
Okay.
I'm just not sure what's going on here.
Hey, there we go. I see a PowerPoint slide.
Might be easier if you can share the slides and then I don't waste more. It keeps saying my screen share is loading, but then it does not actually. And this has never happened to me, so. Oh. Nope. Can you see it?
Yep, I see it, not in presentation view, but we see your screen with the slides.
Okay, let's see if it'll go in.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you for letting me be here today and speak to you. I have been asked to talk about female presentation of autism and mental health. That is clearly a very large topic to cover. It's on what's most helpful and most interesting for everybody. So definitely any questions, comments, let me know, and I will try and keep an eye on those. The discussion of autism in girls and women has been increasing fairly significantly over the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years. And I still feel a lot of our textbooks and information we read about autism is focused more on our more traditional view of autism as it presents in mostly males. But today I want to challenge you all a little bit on shifting your perspective of what autism looks like and feels like, and see if that can be helpful to spot some of the girls we meet or support and understand women who live with autism better. I wanted to put up a few pictures of autistic women and girls. And oops, as you can see, autism looks very different in everybody. I think all of us have heard the quote of when you've met somebody with autism, you've met one person with autism, but I feel sometimes we still don't take that into account when we assess for autism or work with individuals who might be autistic. So a summary, everybody is probably aware of Temple Grandin. The other pictures are stock pictures and not any specific people. However, the reason I selected them is the girl with the book is, we will come back to this, but one special interest of many, many girls who are on the autism spectrum is reading. And it is one of the things that often gets missed because reading is not stereotypically seen as an autistic special interest. So this is one of the examples where we can miss little pointers that somebody might be on the spectrum, but they have a more subtle presentation. The picture in the bottom middle is a young woman that is removing a mask from her face. I don't know if everybody has been confronted with the term masking or camouflaging. This is one of the terms to be very aware of when working with females with autism, as they learn very well and very quickly how to adapt and look like other girls while they're immensely struggling internally with life. A little girl who is clearly very upset. Meltdowns, very common. A quick heads up when I talk about meltdowns, these are not intentional or manipulative. I consider that to be a tantrum. A meltdown is more the idea that somebody's ability to process and regulate is overcapacity, and the person is at that point just surviving and trying to get through the moment. Bottom right picture, I like a lot. Lots of girls I have met and women absolutely love the virtual world. A lot of boys do as well. But this is a very comfortable way for a lot of our girls to connect with others, where social connection in real life can be really difficult and at times traumatic for girls. I want to challenge your thinking, as I said before. I think historically we have seen autism as a set of observable behaviors. And what we're learning from women and girls and others with more subtle presentations of autism is that autism's observable behavior are more of an overflow of symptoms where most of what autism is internal and cannot be seen. And for better or for worse, girls and women tend to be better than boys at hiding what they are struggling with internally. So one piece that I took from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, ASAN, they're online, they're a great resource, but they say we should move away from what does autism look like to what does autism feel like. And they say we think differently, we process our senses differently, we move differently, we communicate differently, we socialize differently, we might need help with daily living. And interestingly, even though women and girls often do all these things differently than what we might expect from in a neurotypical person, again, this often can't be seen on the surface, or it is only observed by people that the person is very comfortable with. So a fairly common situation we see in the schools is that parents have big concerns about a daughter, think they might be autistic, but everybody at school sees a girl that follows all the rules, that does all of her work, that is quiet and never a problem, and says, we don't see any concern with this girl's behavior. But every day these girls come home from school, they have huge meltdowns and sometimes 2 to 3 hours of just falling apart and not being able to regulate. And that's really critical, that we as assessors or people who work with autism are aware that this is occurring, even if it is quote unquote just a parent perspective or parent report. I think probably everybody here is fairly familiar with the overall core symptoms of autism, but I wanted them to just be out here so we can all think about that while we talk about women and girls. So we are thinking and looking at processing and sensory differences, communication and social differences, repetitive behaviors, and special interests. The reason why I put the last two in quotation marks is that those are terms I think our country and culture struggles with updating a lot of terms that we might see as outdated. Those two are kind of on the verge, I think, of being replaced by other terms, but I have not found a great term to replace them with. So here we are. So, what you might not be able to see in girls and women who are autistic. Also, I use the terms autistic person or autistic individual and person with autism interchangeably. What I've learned from many, many clients and people who I've met is that this is a personal preference. And really, what we should do as advocates and providers is to check in with the person we're working with and see what they prefer, and then go with the term that feels most comfortable to them. What do we do with autism if we cannot see or observe the behaviors? Most of us, and I don't know clearly everybody who is here, but most of us are probably familiar with the ADOS, our gold standard assessment tool for autism. And really, a lot of what we do on the ADOS is we get really, really good at looking for subtle behaviors and indicators of autism. Clear things such as eye contact, body movements, facial expressions, directed facial expressions are all things that we are trained very well in paying close attention to. The problem we run into when assessing girls and women is that often they have learned how to mimic other people's eye contact, facial expressions, and other nonverbal behaviors. And I think at first it sounds like a great skill, but what we're seeing is the more that girls and women engage in the mimicking and camouflaging behaviors, the more their mental health tends to suffer. So we see and I think all of the studies so far that have been published on camouflaging show that the more a person mimicking or camouflaging, the worse their mental health tends to become. Internal experiences of females are often different than what we observe. So we might observe a girl in class, for example, who is always behaving appropriately. She looks very calm. She can participate in a group project. But if we ask this girl what is actually happening internally, she is likely to tell us that she feels highly anxious or even afraid, that she feels overwhelmed with sensory and social information, and that she feels like she does not belong. And as I've talked to quite a few adult women with autism, I've heard many women tell me that as early as kindergarten to second grade, when they were girls and growing up, they knew very clearly that I was not like the others. And often when kids are that young, they can't quite pinpoint what it is. But I think for us, it's very critical to understand that very early in life, girls start noticing that they struggle and that they're often girls are not as bullied as boys because their presentation is not as odd and kids don't pick on that, but they often are not included. So what I hear from older teens and women is that they said, people just treated me like I did not exist. So I think that is another piece for us to keep in mind of how we can support girls, and also when we work with other kids or do more education, to make sure that we work on including people that might be really quiet. I think often what happens is that people assume attention.
Like we lost Julia. Oh, there she's rejoining.
I will continue. I'm so sorry. Um, and for girls, social behavior is not natural or intuitive, and I think those can be questioned.
Hey, Julia. I
Yeah.
can't, we can't see your slides. Do you want me to share them so that you're able
Yes, would
to
you
have a
do
little
that?
more?
Because
Yeah.
it keeps shutting, my Zoom keeps quitting.
Yes, I will share them so that there's a little bit less load on your internet.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So, social behavior is often not natural or intuitive, and it is, God, I'm sorry. Which unfortunately leads to girls being not picked up when we look for autism. So this is the problem we run into is girls learn how to hide their autism, which then leads to us as assessors often coming to the conclusion that they don't have autism because we can't see it. Um, Interestingly, this ability to mask or mimic others does not help them um, actually engage in the social interactions that they're expected to, such as playing with others on the playground, for example. Often if you talk to girls, women who are able to express this to us, they will say, well, what I did is not play with others because I didn't know how to do that. I tried to observe others and copy what they were doing. One woman actually told me that in second grade, she would go to recess with a journal. And in this journal, she would write and copy actual dialogues she overheard other kids having. And then she would commit those dialogues to memory, so then she would pull certain scripts in situations that she felt matched that situation. This is tricky, obviously, because social interactions are very, very subtle, and you will struggle to manage an ongoing social interaction by working off of scripts and things you've memorized rather than naturally being able to do that. Um, a lot of women and girls, just like boys, have pretty debilitating sensory experiences. But again, they often don't share this with us. So what they will do in public or at school is that they will bear it, and they will just work really, really, really hard to quote unquote keep it together all day. And then when they come home, again, we see them coming apart and just being absolutely miserable. Um, the other thing that we should be aware of is that we are seeing that many girls, when they are little, they do not seem very impaired. And we feel that, well, if they are autistic, this is very, very subtle and it's not affecting them a lot. Again, because out in public, they often can seem okay. But as girls mature, their differences become more and more noticeable. So in the clinical world that I work in, I see that between fifth and seventh grade, neurotypical girls and autistic girls have very different social paths and trajectories. So one way to deal with that, if you're working on assessing girls, is if you have a little girl where their parent might be concerned about possible autism, but you cannot identify it, or you cannot identify enough of our DSM-5 symptoms, is we will encourage parents to keep a close eye on their daughter's development, and we encourage them to come back for evaluation as girls get older and as differences might become more noticeable, instead of saying your daughter does not have autism, which then often shuts that observation off. And then we miss valuable time to help support these girls. So clinical, that's the next slide, Rachel. Clinical presentation of ASD in girls. So again, if we move a little bit away from just thinking about DSM symptoms, but see what do they present as in their environments. We have girls that get very easily overwhelmed. So kids that cannot tolerate, for example, you may have a girl that wants to do gymnastics, but after 20 minutes of a gymnastics class, she just either falls apart or she comes to the parent and she just says, I can't do it anymore, I need to leave. I guess behaviorally, if we were to do a functional behavior assessment, the thing we see is a lot of what we call escape maintained behaviors. What's really, really tricky about labeling that behaviorally is often what that leads to is that we try and make it so kids cannot escape. But really, what we should focus on is really understanding what is happening, that this girl person is having this great need to get away or get out or run away or hide. I am behaviorally trained, but I've also learned that really we need to focus very, very much more on the feelings and the underlying things that kids or adults are dealing with instead of just trying to fix a behavior by saying, here's an example. One of our girls in the clinic, she's 13 in middle school, very, very bright, but really struggles making it through the day at school. And what teachers noticed is that she would keep going into the library. So it was pretty easy, right? She's escaping with, let's say, math. And so the clear behavioral approach was, well, if she runs to the library, then let's make it so she can't go to the library. But then what happens is then we have a girl that's completely dysregulated and falling apart in school because what she really needs is that quiet, calm environment where she has full control. So this is one of these examples where understanding autism and not just seeing the quote unquote problem behaviors that often prompt evaluations to really be able to support these kids better. For a lot of girls, eye contact appears pretty typical. Again, if you're doing an ADOS, be a detective. I like to actually ask about eye contact. AJ, get out. Sorry. I ask about eye contact, and people will tell you a lot that they need to think about making eye contact all of the time. So it's not a natural process like for most of us. But they learn pretty early on that you should look at people when you talk to them. So they learn that behavior and they learn to do it because they really, really don't like it being pointed out that they're not behaving quote unquote appropriately. Many, many of these girls absolutely hate being the focus of attention and they don't want to be noticed. So they will do anything in their power to not be noticed. Um, However, if you closely pay attention to eye contact, right? I think most of us are very aware that it's not autism isn't no eye contact versus eye contact, but as we call it, socially modulated eye contact. If you are more of a detective, I think you will often be able to pick up on some differences in eye contact than what you would expect. Girls and women tend to have very high social anxiety, which is tricky because, again, that can lead to a lot of avoidance and escape behaviors. And it also makes girls miss out on a lot of the things they actually would really like to participate in. Social anxiety and autism, I feel, is a little bit different than social anxiety in neurotypical populations because often the person is aware that there is something they don't know, but they don't know for sure what to do instead. Social anxiety needs to be addressed, probably less so with more exposure to social situations and more with, again, understanding where the person is struggling, what specifically they're worrying about so we can support them. We see quite a few clients, and again, this does not just happen in girls and females, but it's less common in males we see is when they're talking with somebody, their whole focus is on making sure they don't make the other person upset. So they're not focusing on the conversation and how they might want to engage in the conversation, but they listen to everything the person says, then they translate it, and then often what they will do is they will give an answer of what they think you want to hear, just so they don't get in trouble. So this is tricky, again, during an assessment situation, because sometimes at our clinic, we sometimes say some people are too autistic for us to see the autism. Like they're masking so much doing an autism assessment because they want to please us and give us right answers, that in the end we don't even get the information that we really needed for autism. So if this ever happens, if you feel you have, and this might be more so for adults or older teens, but if you're working with a young woman in an assessment situation and you feel I'm not seeing it, I'm not hearing her describe it, it is really, really critical to talk to other people, talk to family members. So clearly, if they're living at home, talk to parents. I've had a woman, she was in her 30s, and I did an ADOS, and she got a score of 1, and she was convinced she had autism. And I tried to ask all the questions, and I did a really good interview, and I just could not get it. And towards the end of the assessment, she said, "Will you please talk to my sister-in-law, who I live with?" So she lived with her brother and her sister-in-law. And I reached out to the sister-in-law, and when I talked to her, I mean, she gave me a picture perfect autism description of the client. So being aware that even sometimes people who want to be assessed for autism and who are autistic can still struggle to communication, right? They can still struggle communicating clearly what it is that they're struggling with. Repetitive behaviors and interests are less noticeable in girls. I think that's another piece of why often we have missed them, because we didn't have the, I mean, I guess there's the classical interested in elevators, escalators, sort of machines, or intense gaming, or dinosaurs, sort of the, like the things we've all heard many times. But what girls and women often are really into are things that are very socially appropriate and socially normal. Like I mentioned at the beginning, that reading is for me is a red flag. When I have a parent saying my girl reads pretty much all day, every day, she always has a book with her, that is a red flag for autism in girls. The reason that is so is reading helps them escape the difficulties they're living with. So a lot of girls are into fantasy. So it seems to go both two ways. So fantasy, science fiction, or reading for information and being really interested in science. A lot of teen girls are very interested in psychology and how the brain works so they can understand people better. Another girls often are very connected to animals and love animals and will know and learn everything about animals. So that is another kind of a red flag when you hear somebody talking about there being an intense interest or an intense connection to animals. Animals are safe, much safer than people, and they're fascinating and they can be calming. So a lot of clients have emotional support animals that are really making a big difference in their lives because that feels safe. Um, Other interests, so what's really tricky is when we have teens and preteen girls whose special interest is boys. Again, not an unusual thing for girls to be interested in, but what we're seeing in girls that have a special interest in boys is that, again, it's the only thing they can see, it's the only thing they want, while also having a very poor social understanding and being at very high risk of being taken advantage of or sexually abused. So that is another reason why being aware of this autism piece can really be critical for girls as they grow up. A lot of girls, and I see it a lot, especially in teens and adults, they want to have friends. They want to feel connected. A lot of girls will have a best friend. It's a question, I think, on the SRS that says, has a best friend. And it's sort of, if you say yes, it leans more towards the side of not being on the spectrum, the way it sort of gets measured, right? But actually, a lot of girls will have a best friend who's also a girl, And what we see is that often that friend is a friend that's either socially savvy and kind of knows how to do everything. So the autistic girl always is connected to that girl's hip and will just kind of follow them along because it's a guide and it can work really, really well. Um, and the other is that often autistic girls will connect very securely and strongly with other autistic girls, or they don't, right? So sometimes it's tricky. When I've worked in the schools, we tried the whole, well, you have autism. Here's another person with autism. You guys can be friends. And I'm like, well, it doesn't work like that, right? Kids will say, well, they're weird, they're this or that. I don't want them as a friend. But I think if we find girls that have similar interests and introduce them, friendships can develop, and that can be a source of a lot of emotional and social support. Next slide. So, female presentation. I am referencing, there is a book, and I will, you know what, Rachel, I will send you a link to if people are interested in it.
Yeah, for sure.
The book is called Assessment of Autism in Females and Nuanced Presentations. I don't get anything if you buy that book. I just think it's the first resource that brings together research, but also what the writers, and they're all from people from around Utah. What they also did is they got a lot of narratives from autistic women talking about these issues, which I think up till now has always been something that we've really missed. We've looked at a lot of numbers. The title again, Assessment of Autism in Females and Nuanced Presentations. And Teresa Gabrielson is the lead author on that book. Oh, perfect. So I mean, if you are really interested in this kind of stuff, that book will open your eyes and it's absolutely amazing. So social skills differences in friendships. Again, as we said, girls don't often look as odd or different as boys because they have a higher social awareness. And again, clearly not every girl will present the same way, but the girls that tend to get missed, especially. Um, and they really like friendships, they like close friendships, they like to hang out. And their social skills are often self-taught, which can be good and it can be really tricky, right? Because often they are not right on, and then they actually do make themselves a target of either being picked on or people saying, "Well, you're too different. I don't want to do things with you, or I don't know how to talk to you." Um, Play and imagination. So one of the things we've historically looked at with autism is how do kids play? And do they have an imagination? Do they understand imagination and play, right? Like one of our ADOS tasks is with younger kids is playing and engaging with the child. And we're quite a few of the boys, they just don't, and they will tell you what the things are. They will look at you uncomfortably. A lot of girls are very imaginative and they love to play pretend. And what we're seeing patterns in is that unfortunately they're not very flexible with the way they play, and so they're very repetitive. There was a study, and I'm sorry I did not have the citation for it right now, but it looked at girls playing and it used the example of a dollhouse. A lot of girls love the dollhouse, they love their dolls, they love the families and all the things. But when they were closely watched while they were playing, observers realized that they replay a similar story over and over again, whereas neurotypical kids will develop new stories and they have more varied play. So play does seem more repetitive, even though it can be very imaginative. Sometimes imagination goes way too far. So it's probably something we've all noticed, right? In autism, I always feel things are not balanced. So we either see too little of something or too much of something. So imagination, some kids don't have an imagination. It becomes really difficult for them to play and interact with others. On the other end of the extreme, we have some of these kids, and I see it more in girls, who have such an imagination that other kids can't follow them. I mean, to the point that sometimes I am wondering, like, do they understand they're pretending? Is there possibly a psychotic process? Because it really sometimes feels so extreme and out there. What tends to happen is as girls age and they get more towards the middle school age, often their way of playing and engaging does not mature as other girls do. And that's one of the things we see as they get middle school age and older, is that they keep doing some things that just don't work anymore, which sort of alienates them more from other kids. Or kids get tired of it. I have a very good friend with an autistic daughter who has one of these very, very imaginative brains. And at some point, my son was like, I don't want to play pretend anymore. Can we do something different? And she could not shift. And she just kept wanting to do the same thing over and over. And then they lose friends, right? Because the friends are like, well, I don't know what to do this. I can't do this anymore. Um, so more in sense of relationships, conflicts in relationships can be tricky, and again, we will probably see that more in the adolescent years and older. But as you think of people who tend to be fairly rigid in their thinking and their behaviors and struggle with social communication, social conflicts can arise. And unfortunately, to solve a conflict, often you need to be able to shift perspective, which a lot of the girls can't do. It is really, really difficult for them. Let me give you an example of a young woman at our clinic. We do a social night once a month. And she was sitting in a space that somebody else needed, who was close to a meltdown, so needed a calm space in an office. And I asked her to please, come out of my office so the other person could come in. And she was just not responsive. She's like, well, okay, I can maybe. And then she got up and kind of put a bow in her hair, and like it was really the lack of awareness of what the other person needed was really, really low. And her rigidity made it so hard, even for me, to find a way to get her to move out of that situation. Um, so that's, I think, where we can see some of these conflicts arise. This is also a girl who had a best friend growing up. Again, one of these best friends, as I mentioned, that was, socially successful, academically did well. And what happened when they graduated is that her best friend just disappeared and ghosted her completely, which led to, at this point, years of agony and sadness and grief without any, I mean, I would really say without any understanding why her best friend might have seen the need to separate herself. So the being ghosted by friends is something we see not infrequently in clinical practice. And it's really, really tricky, right? Because often the focus was on this one person, hyper focus, rigid, and you can't just replace a person like that. So I have two current clients who had that happen with a best friend, and neither have been able to develop a new friendship over the last 4 or 5 years. Best techniques to address empathy and perspective taking. That is a really good question. And I think it takes a lot of time. And I have towards the end, and I will try to move through this so we have time to talk also, but I have some ideas with therapeutic approaches. I think what's being done a lot, right, is because it's what we've done for the last 20 years, is say, well, she can go to a social skills class. Unfortunately, what I see in reality is that often, even though girls will be really good at following the rules and learning the steps, it does not become intuitive, and they can't perform the task, even if they can tell you the tasks. So with my one client that lost her best friend, that also had such a hard time shifting out and leaving my office when somebody was clearly in distress. It's really, really hard. A lot of women, girls, they're very, very sensitive and very emotional people. And I think that's another piece that I didn't write as a point, but we need to all be aware of. A lot of these girls are very easily upset. That can be, again, by a change, right? Change in plans, change in routine, but it can be this interpersonal sensitivity. And so you, another thing people always say, a lot of times say, and when it comes to treating autism and helping people, is you need to be direct. Well, in theory, the works really nicely. Well, you just tell them how it is. But then when you have a really sensitive person, they crumple and I mean, they will become hopeless and despondent. So we have to be really, really cautious on very gently introducing some of these ideas. And again, it takes a long time. But when you have a really solid, safe relationship with the person you're working with, I think then you can gently bring up some of these issues and say, something I've noticed is X. So with my one client, we've labeled it at this point as perspective taking, so I can use that term to help her see that that's what we're talking about. I'm not criticizing her. I'm not saying she's wrong or bad or not trying hard enough, which is the narratives that a lot of girls carry with them, and boys actually too. And that then we can use examples, but then for them to take that extra step to be able to perform that in a non-structured social situation, it's very, very difficult. And I don't, unfortunately, have great answers yet how to. I see so many of the manualized approaches, and I always think, well, if I could make that work for the person, I would love it, but I often can't. Because it does take a lot to shift perspective to help with that rigid piece. Um, Already talked about the restricted special interest and repetitive behaviors. It can be an asset. So there are a lot of autistic girls and women that love to connect around their special interests. So some of the things we see, Pokemon, right? Pokemon Go. I mean, so the things, if you haven't heard of them, write them down, learn them. I had to learn them. And it's really interesting. Pokemon Go is a really cool thing because it's a virtual and people actually go out in the real world with their phones and catch these Pokemon through this app. And they have what's called community days. And when if you ever go to one of those, they're usually at a park. You see tons of people with phones and it's really cool. It's that sense of community without being expected to interact or perform a certain skill. And it takes a lot of pressure off. Clearly, if you have, I mean, interests can go everywhere, right? Like also girls talking, learning, like getting to college and being able to take psychology classes can also be a really good things for girls to feel good. But it's harder to connect interpersonally. Um, One really important thing is to be aware of safety with girls and women who are on the spectrum. So sort of outward bullying I actually don't hear that much of anymore from the people I'm coming in contact with. Again, what they're more just crushed, absolutely crushed by is feeling left out and never be included in things. So one of my clients just last week, we were talking about her time in elementary school, and she said, I wanted to be friends with these other girls so badly. So what I did is every time we walked home, I just followed them. So idea, right? This brings me closer to these girls, but what is it showing? It shows how different you are, and it makes these girls even more notice that you are different than them and makes it harder to be included. So often you will see, especially younger girls, engaging in attempts to try and engage or interact, but they often fall flat. And again, that's where I started right before the pandemic, we started an autistic girls group and we just met once a month. and there was about 6 or 7 elementary age girls, and they were all super quiet by themselves. But I got them together, and after 15 minutes, they were all talking, they were interacting, they started pretending to be Pokemon and doing all sorts of things. So that can be a way. I mean, you can't say be this person's friend, but you can try and get a group of kids together who have similar interests, like art. A lot of girls are very artistic, very much into art. Creative writing is another activity a lot of people really enjoy. They either enjoy it or they absolutely hate it, right? Um, so we know that autistic women are 8 times more likely to be sexually victimized than neurotypical women. So we need to teach girls about relationships, relationship safety. There is quite a bit of research going on right now, as it's been noticed that this is an immense need we have for this population. Um, and really helping girls understand. There's one of my favorite autism ADOS questions is, what's the difference between a friend and a best friend? How do you know if somebody is your girlfriend or boyfriend? Um, so I like that question, even if I work with somebody in therapy and I notice that relationships are tricky, those questions can give you a whole lot of information about how this person has constructed this idea of what a friend is. Often what you will see is it's very one-sided. Well, they like the same things I do. They do things with me, they help me, and there is limited awareness of the reciprocity of those relationships. um, and sometimes it can go the opposite, right? We have a young woman who comes to the clinic who works a job, I think, in a grocery store, and she's constantly reading what other people might want or need from her. So this has led to her doing all the other unpleasant jobs that nobody wants to do because she wants to help and be a good person while she's being taken advantage of by others because they can see, they can tell her whatever they want and she's going to do it. So there's often a certain naivete um, from girls and women. Where in our clinic we specialize in working with girls and women, so we see a lot of that population, and we have several female clients who have PhDs in science and other languages. But when it comes to understanding relationships and not being taken advantage of, it's really, really difficult. So we see a lot of these splinter skills in a good sense, right? Like things people are really good at. We've always seen that in autism. A lot of people have strengths in specific areas, but there are these, as I call them, holes that then often don't get noticed because everybody focuses on, oh, she's taking 5 AP classes and she's got a full ride scholarship to the U or wherever she wants to go. But can she take care of herself? Hygiene can be a huge, just as problematic as with boys for a lot of girls, but for girls, it's even more detrimental. Um, and it's really interesting because I feel we can teach so many things, right? Here are the steps to taking a shower. Make sure you use soap, make sure you use shampoo and conditioner, rinse it out, use deodorant. But when it comes to performing the skill, it is really tricky. Like it just doesn't click. And then often, even if you've taught it, it can't be performed until there's been a lot of repetition. And what we're seeing is not just repetition, but also there has to be an interest from the person, right? We had a 14-year-old girl, um, and this might be something you see too, is girls who still have difficulties with enuresis, even when if they're pretty old. So this girl was coming home from school almost every day, and she had wet herself, and she was in 8th grade. And we could talk until we were blue in our head. It did not connect why it's a big deal. So there was no interest. And when there was no interest in figuring it out, then there was no change. So then she said, well, I want to start dating. And we were like, well, can't date really well if you can't figure out when you need to go to the bathroom and get yourself cleaned up. And then there was a little bit of an interest. We saw a shift because then there was a connection of why it might be important. Well, a boy might not want to go out with a girl who smells. So sometimes you have to be really creative in finding out what could be these pivotal motivators to help learn new skills. Um, some red next slide, Rachel. Thank you. Um, next are red flag diagnoses. So I wanted to put these here because what we see a lot in older girls, so more teenage girls and women, is that they carry one of these diagnoses. And actually what is actually happening is that they're autistic. So selective mutism comes up a lot. I would love to look into some of the research that connects selective mutism and autism. Um, it seems to be quite common in girls, elementary age girls, right? They can talk at home and they're okay, but at school they will never vocalize anything. So it can be, when I hear there's a student with selective mutism, I always want to screen for autism. I want to make sure I'm not missing that because it's a consequence of the autism, right? It's not a separate, they're tightly connected. Oppositional defiant disorder. So these are the girls that do stick out. And again, we see this diagnosis probably more in boys that are on the spectrum, but I've seen it in several girls. The problem is, again, when you have that label, the focus will be on fixing your behaviors, and people will not try to figure out very well what's actually leading to them, like very rigid thinking, can't change things, can't adjust. So with ODD in girls, I usually also want to screen for autism and make sure, because there is this really strong temperament that we see in some girls. And that's, I mean, we see in boys, right, with behavioral issues is kind of this similar intensity. And they get described as contrary, oppositional, can be aggressive. Where often when you dissect the behaviors that are leading to that label, they can be meltdowns. So the girl that's kept it together at school all day and is coming home and is kicking holes in the wall probably is not due to trying to be oppositional or being difficult. It's that she's kept all of this together the whole day and now she's at home. And what does mom say? Let's go do your homework. And then you will have an explosion and the person cannot regulate. And then awful things get said. I mean, it's the sweetest girls, and then you talk to parents and what can happen during these meltdowns, and it's horrifying and scary. So get all the pieces. Sensory processing disorder, is all, and you see that more in younger kids, right, or elementary age. When I see that, I also always I want to rule out autism. Yes, clearly there are kids who only have sensory issues and they're not autistic, but especially with girls who might not look very autistic, make sure you rule out that there isn't another component to the sensory piece. A lot of girls get diagnosed with ADHD. I feel in the 90s we got a lot better at picking up on that, but there is huge overlap. I mean, that would be a whole extra hour probably or more of talking about the overlap between autism and ADHD. So I'll leave it brief. When ADHD is a part of the picture, again, screen for autism, see if you don't need to make sure you do an assessment to rule it out. Question, do women with ASD also have higher risk of developing a psychotic disorder? Yes. Psychosis, and we'll talk about comorbid diagnoses here in a second, but psychosis is more common in people with autism than neurotypical people. There's some genetic connections they're finding now that they're doing more genetic analyses, but it is more common. And it can be really, really, really hard sometimes to sort out if something is more of an autistic way of looking at something or if it's psychosis. So that is one of the trickiest rule outs sometimes that we see. And it's actually pretty important because if a person is psychotic, you want to treat it with medication. Social anxiety disorder, social phobia, already mentioned, but very quiet. Oh, they're just shy. They're just really quiet when they're around a lot of people. Yes, and there might be more to it, so make sure you look at it. In women, huge red flag, borderline personality disorder. Again, that would be a whole extra um, presentation that I don't know how many of you are working with adults primarily. Problem in the adult world is a lot of adult providers have never had an exposure to autism at all. And what we see in a lot of autistic women is they're very sensitive, they have very strong reactions, we will talk about this, they self-harm, they're suicidal, they often have trauma, and they struggle in relationships. So for an adult provider who sees that in a person with several psychiatric admissions, they will jump to a borderline diagnosis pretty quickly without looking. So for women, especially if a woman comes to you and says, I think I'm autistic and I've been diagnosed as borderline, take a close look at it. OCD, it's not super common that it gets misdiagnosed, but they can coexist, and it's really, really tricky to treat when both are existent, autism and OCD. But again, when you have a referral of somebody who has OCD and you notice some other sensory things or some odd social things, take a closer look at the autism piece. Okay, quick words to know. Meltdown, I already mentioned. Meltdown is different from a tantrum or a fit or whatever other words people use. I feel it's important to distinguish those because a meltdown is not something a person has control over. But once it's going, really scary things happen, right? Holes kicked in the wall, things get thrown, broken, things get said. That is neurologically overwhelmed system that can't regulate, needs support, and needs safety. What happens when we consequence meltdowns like a tantrum or like bad behavior is we get kids that are utterly, utterly, utterly depressed, and they give up. And they feel like they shouldn't be seen, they shouldn't be heard, and those are the adults we work with, and this is really, really, really hard to fix. A shutdown and burnout are sort of newer terms over the last few years. A shutdown is sort of the opposite of a meltdown. You have an overloaded system, but instead of externalizing everything, the person is pulling in. And it's when you get kids that won't give you an answer, they won't shake or nod their head, and so they seem oppositional in a sense that they won't try and help find a problem. But when a person is in shutdown, it's lizard brain, right? It's like a trauma response is like you need to regulate first before you can do any problem solving or helping or processing. Burnout is something we've come to know through adults. It's this idea of, again, with all these things people are constantly managing. For some people, at some point, it's like a major depressive episode, but often the person isn't actually clinically depressed, but they can't do anything. So they might just be home and watch TV. They stop taking care of themselves. A lot of symptoms seem to overlap with depression, but the person isn't necessarily sad or depressed. It's just like they're out of battery and out of energy for anything, which is tricky when you're an autistic mom and you have 4 kids that now also have all been diagnosed as autistic, and you have a husband who loves to play video games and works in the computer industry. So things sort of the big implications of some of these things. I don't need to go over autism diagnoses are important, right? It's important so people can find a sense of belonging, they can find ways of connection, we can find different ways to with psychoeducation and helping them understand themselves. So I mean, it's a whole host of things where sometimes people are like, why are women or girls, why are people so worried about getting a diagnosis? They're fine. I mean, they have a high IQ, they have straight A's, but it's life that's constantly affected by autism. Okay. Traditional females in testing, I'm going to go over this very quickly. There are still very few measures with separate gender norms, the exception being the SRS-2 social responsiveness scale. Don't know if you're probably all familiar with it. Unfortunately, only their school age form has girl and boy norms. I wish their adult form did as well, but it's a start in the right direction. We need to be careful. Like what we've historically done, we've compared girls to autistic boys. They don't look the same. Some do, of course, but things are much more subtle, as we've talked about. There are quite a few girls and women who will not meet cutoff criteria on an ADOS unless you're a huge, unless you're a really good detective. Sometimes on the ADOS, it's hard to hit the mark. And again, ADOS would be a whole different presentation, but it is okay to diagnose autism if all the evidence says there is autism and the person doesn't meet cutoff criteria. I know a lot of people are uncomfortable with it, but it can change the lives of some people who don't have a lot of outward behavior and know how to answer questions really well. Um, so it's a war, it's a battle to be a female with autism. Quickly, mental health and autism. So the things to be aware of is there's clinical overlap, right? Like I mentioned it with borderline personality disorder. Think about depression. If you get a 13-year-old girl that comes in and is referred for an assessment of depression or of autism, and she's also depressed, how do we sort out? So, right, depression, often the person is more muted, they don't have as much expression in their voice, they don't engage much, they do fewer things, can all overlap with autism. One of the things is to really be clear, like autism is a developmental disability, right? Where depression would have an onset, a specific onset at some point. Now, girls are complicated, and again, some of the little girls you will not pick up on because they can do all the little kid things and you don't see it until middle school, so that can complicate this too, right? Because depression middle school increase anyway. So, symptom overlap versus a rule out diagnosis. So, is this depression or autism? Is this social anxiety or autism? And then, of course, you have co-occurring diagnoses. And that's what we'll talk about here in a minute. So for girls and women who are diagnosed with autism, they have higher to much, much higher incidences of these issues as well. So that's in my world what we focus on treating. We don't treat autism symptoms. We work on helping people manage their anxiety, manage their mood. Eating disorders, much more common in autism. I think that's still a very murky subject. We see a lot of disordered eating, anything from sensory things to being overwhelmed and not being to eat. We have several clients who are sort of on the verge of an anorexia diagnosis, but they just don't quite fit it. But we still have to focus on their eating. And I'm not necessarily a proponent of feeding therapy unless it's done really, really well and really, really carefully, because it can be really traumatic. Anxiety disorders, social anxiety we talked about, OCD I mentioned, but generalized anxiety disorder is really, really high. It seems like a lot of spectrum people, their brains never slow down. They always have an ongoing commentary. And for a lot of people, that ongoing commentary is very, very anxious or very, very depressed and mean to themselves. High rates of depression. Again, we start seeing that in middle school and it continues. A lot of really depressed adults that don't feel they deserve to exist. They feel they're not good for anything. They're worried to say the wrong thing. We in therapy have to work all the time on, well, Julia, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this. I'm not sure if it's correct. So I think from being in school, right, a lot of things are right or wrong. And I think these kids are told all the time, well, no, that's not the case. A lot of girls or women get told that they probably are misperceiving something, which is fair, right? Like autistic individuals can struggle reading social situations, but if you grow up constantly being told that you're misperceiving as an adult, can you be confident in your ability to do anything? So then we have to undo all that over a long period of time and say, you know what, your perception is always valid. And so we have to try and expand that and really help people. But it's really hard to unlearn some of those things. ADHD overlap is huge. And again, it would be really interesting to talk about ADHD, autism, the overlaps. There's now a term called AUD-HD. I don't know if people have seen it. It's AUDHD. And there was a paper recently where they showed there is one genetic region where there is clear overlap of ADHD and autism, where other regions are either autism or ADHD. So, but again, whole different. Trauma. Be aware of trauma. Trauma is one of the most common co-occurring diagnoses in women that we see. And trauma is tricky. So higher rates of abuse, people being taken advantage of, higher rates of sexual abuse, but also when you have really, really sensitive people, even things that we wouldn't consider normally being traumatic events can be extremely traumatic. And where we really see this is in some of these autism family units, where there is one or both parents who have spectrum traits. So picture having a dad who is very rigid, very smart, very analytical. Let's say he's an accountant. And you have a girl who is very, very sensitive. She's into fairies and unicorns and cries very easily, very sensory overstimulated. What are you going to get? You're going to get a situation that's really, really tricky to manage. And you're going to get a dad that's constantly going to punish or consequence the daughter for not doing what she's supposed to do. All while you have a little super sensitive girl that's getting destroyed. So really important if you work with this. It's a lot of family work, helping everybody understand each other better so we can adjust parenting to account for being really sensitive and easily traumatized. Autism and suicide, I will leave that slide where it is. Suicide and autism is about 8 times higher than in the neurotypical population. 8 times. Suicide is one of the leading causes of deaths for people with autism. Research has kicked into pretty high gear. The reason why I put this here is that neurotypical women are less likely to attempt, no, they're more likely to attempt suicide, but less likely to succeed. Autistic women are more likely to attempt and more likely to succeed. So a lot of autism, right? Like they will research things, and once they're set, getting that out of their brain that it's just not worth doing anymore, it gets really, really, really hard. And it gets really scary really fast. Again, there's that overlap where people sometimes misread it as attention seeking or attention getting. It's not. It's I'm in crisis. I don't know what. It's like an existential fear. So next, second to last slide. So how to work with mental health issues and autism. So when somebody's assessed for autism, what is the prime recommendation is get ABA to help with autism. That's the one leg of this. The other leg is evidence-based practice, important to all of us, right? Neither of these tend to work really well or at all for people. And there was a couple questions earlier, right? This is really, really tricky stuff to treat because of the different processing, different communication, all the stressors. So unfortunately, I get frustrated by hearing so much about evidence-based practice. Not that I don't think it's not good, but you will find a lot of articles about cognitive behavior therapy to address anxiety and autism. I would say 9 out of 10 of our clients cannot access CBT. For example, so with CBT, you need to be a flexible thinker. You're supposed to change how you think about a situation, right? That is really, really, really hard. Here's an example. A lot of kids are really afraid to learn how to drive, even though intellectually and they can do all of it. But they will say, Julia, I'm worried I'm going to get in an accident. Well, one of the CBT techniques that's, used a lot and a lot works really well for a lot of people is thinking about statistics. Well, really, when you look at how much people drive and how often they're getting in an accident, it's very unlikely. Julia, you just told me it can happen. So it often, these very rational brains, they will find a rationale for their thinking, and trying to convince the person that that maybe not the best way to think about it can be really, really hard. I don't know how, I mean, I've worked at the University of Utah and we ran evidence-based programs and we struggled getting the same results. So be cautious. There are other ways. Last slide. So what we at our clinic do differently is we actually start with a humanistic approach. When I was in grad school, I thought humanistic approach, so it's Rogers et al., very validating, observing, commenting, supporting. I honestly thought that was the silliest way of trying to help somebody with their problems, because I was thinking, but you're not doing anything. Well, you have to approach it that way to build a relationship that is solid. And for some of our clients, that can take months. So where you can actually talk about problems and they're not just trying to tell you that they're fine because they want to please you. Like, this isn't a malicious thing. This is like a survival skill for them. So you have to build that relationship without anything critical, without trying to push for something or push for change. Once you establish a relationship, then it is very, very, very client dependent. Some clients really want a handout and they want to know how they can do some of these things. But that's usually not our kids. I see that maybe like, our the young adults that are turning into real adults at like 24, 25. Kids, as soon as you bring up a problem, just try teaching one of the kids how to breathe when they're upset. It's pretty funny and comical. You can write down all the comments they will have why it's not going to work and that it's really stupid. So it's tricky because we have all these interventions that are really, really promising. I love mindfulness. I love breathing, but helping a rigid thinker accept those and try them can be really, really hard. So you need to be patient and try different things. So I probably talked way too much, but if there are any questions I can answer as I'm to the end of my slides, I would love to. Or if you guys have any thoughts, um, or would like to hear my thoughts on anything I did not mention today.
Thanks, Julia. And by the way, everyone, these slides there will be a PDF version on the Canvas page if you'd like to see them, read through them again. Or if you don't have access to our Canvas page, you can send me an email and I can get you a PDF copy.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Zoom is always a little tricky because I feel I can't look at you and see. I'm interested more about how to support that reciprocal thinking and perspective taking. I think it's hard, and I don't want to come off as negative. I've just been doing this for quite a while, and doing therapy in the setting is really tricky. But again, have a relationship. For some people, so it also depends on their interests a little bit. Sometimes using literature, especially teens are reading and talking, using examples of relationships and interactions out of either books or movies can help make it a little bit more accessible. I tend to actually self-disclose more than probably what most therapists do to sort of illustrate a situation that I might. So I don't make it about them because often that makes the person become pretty defensive and anxious. So I will remove it and either talk about another person or make up a story, but not make it about my client and sort of talk through, well, here's something I've noticed before, or this may be something to think about. So, sort of kind of, I feel we give a lot of little nudges and little examples, and we plant a lot of seeds. So people can start thinking, and then as you keep working, you need to come back to these things. It's not a one session, or a 6 session kind of a goal. It's really a developmental piece that we just keep coming back to. And we use a lot of examples from real life and what we do in situations where things really went wrong. We do what we call postmortems. So we use an example that was really hard, and then we try and see how we could have gotten to a different result with the same situation, if that makes sense. So, and also, Rachel, if anybody contacts you, you can share my email. If anybody has questions about something else, just send me an email and I'll try to answer it. I do a monthly peer supervision group for people who do therapy with autistic clients. So if that's something you're interested in, you can also send me an email. We're currently working on a new time and sort of figuring that out. But that's honestly been helpful for some of us as providers, because this is hard work. And when you meet other providers who see a similar population, um, you can support each other and kind of say, right, this is so much harder than I ever thought it was. Actually, a quote about a colleague and friend who used to work mostly with autistic clients and then switched to sort of more broad population. He said, Julia, people without autism actually get better when you help them with their anxiety. So really noticing how change is so much quicker for neurotypical people, and it takes a lot more work and connection for autistic clients. I'd love to hear your thought about being neurodivergent affirming while also addressing mental illness or troublesome behaviors. I feel this is what we do at our clinic, and it's tricky. And I think, again, I think the first part of therapy and working with a client has to be relationship building, no matter how bad the behaviors might be. I just think jumping right to trying to fix some of these behaviors is really difficult. But when you have a safe relationship and the person sees you as their support and somebody who wants to help them, then I feel you can openly talk about these things. I would say most of our clients actually will come and say, hey, especially older ones, right? It will say, hey, Julia, here's a thing that keeps happening and I need help. And with that safe relationship, then you can jump right in it. But behaviors are slow to change. And again, we do it almost from an opposite perspective as a behavioral perspective. I mean, not in a sense that we're rewarding poor behavior, but we're not consequencing it and we're more noticing it. And we will label it as this is really hard, but we're not going to label it with, this can't happen anymore. I feel then people shut down. You're more likely to have another behavior because they're overwhelmed and they feel awful about themselves. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful. Feel
Awesome.
free to send me an email. Thank you so much for having me, Rachel, and I hope this was helpful.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Julia. And thanks everyone who was able to stay for the full time. Again, I put my email in the chat. So if you have any questions, comments, or you'd like the slides, that peer supervision group sounds like a really awesome opportunity. So if you have interest in that, feel free to reach out as well. And this recording will be on the Canvas page, so you can join that Canvas page as well if you'd like to access this in the future. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.